Welcome to MENSCHlife TV. I'm Doris Epstein, and today I've got a treat for you. A Canadian-born musician who is the artistic director of the largest Yiddish music festival in North America, Stein, and the leader of an award-winning musical group. But we're going to also be talking about an amazing experience he's had in Poland with a pre-war mandolin orchestra. Also, Mika Gang, a member of Hashomer Tzair, a Zionist Youth group, and a participant with Hashomer Tzair here in Toronto of the Occupy movement. We'll hear from her what's this all about and where is it going. First, I want you to see a documentary about Eric's experiences in Poland with the Ger Mandolin Orchestra, a group that formed before the war and that is now continuing, and he arranged all the music.
Góra Kalewaria wyróżniła się tym, dlatego że w Górze Kalewarii był jedyny cadyk, nazywał się Alter i on miał uznanie w całej Polsce i poza tym na świecie.
Orkiestra w Górze Kalwarii działała tutaj w latach przedwojennych. Rekonstrukcja tego jest dla nas bardzo ważnym wydarzeniem, bo swoją przyszłość naszego miasta chcemy budować w oparciu o historię. Społeczność żydowska w naszym mieście żyła ponad 200 lat. Dzisiejsza uroczystość, dzisiejszy koncert orkiestry jest finałem, a jednocześnie jest pomostem, który może budować lepsze jutro.
We need many ways to remember the incredibly rich Jewish life that existed before the Holocaust. And we have a lot of stone monuments, but this is a living monument. And it's a monument that functions a completely different way. As a kind of memory, it functions in a completely different way because what it does is it brings something to life rather than honoring something that's dead. And it brings it to life in a way that's completely transportable. It brings it to life in the US, where there are Jews who descended from the places that were destroyed. It brings it to life here, where the Jews have vanished. And so as a living, breathing memorial, I think it's extraordinarily powerful, and I think it speaks to a very, very wide audience, and it speaks to a young audience, which is terribly important.
This is like an incredible group of mandolin players. I couldn't imagine a better setup for this project.
It's amazing. It's kind of ridiculous. I feel really privileged to get to play with, just about the best mandolin players and musicians around, from all over the world.
Havdalah is important in this very holy place that we make. Now the blessing of fire.
Now to bring it back here, it's very rich, very deep, very emotional for me. Even though I'm not Jewish, I still can feel the presence of the people who lived here and went to this synagogue. So it's very special.
you had an extraordinary experience. A Canadian-born guy in Poland with a pre-war mandolin orchestra. I gather it was a Jewish orchestra.
In the past or the current one, you mean?
Both?
Well, the original orchestra consisted of Jewish people in the town of
But
Ger.
the material is Jewish, Yiddish?
Well, it's okay.
Both?
So we have to sort of define our terms here. So there's the original orchestra that was active in the 20s and 30s. We only have our historical researching instincts to determine what that orchestra actually played. There's no record of the music that they actually played. So in terms of this project coming together, we had to make a lot of educated guesses and research in any way we could. So fast forward to last year when this project first came together, and so I'll get back to your first question. The orchestra that is now reformed to honor the original Ger Mandolin Orchestra, there's only 3 Jews in the orchestra. There's 11 musicians, only 3 of us are Jewish. So that's...
Is there anybody that is still alive from before the war?
Not originally from the orchestra, but in the clip we just watched, there are 2 Jewish people still living in the town of Ger, which is known as Góra Kalvária today in Poland. So these people served as resources that could tell us some things about the orchestra. But we should back up and tell you a little bit about the genesis of the whole project, because that's, I think, what's really fascinating about it. There's a man named Avner Yonai who lives in San Francisco, an Israeli who lives there, and he was researching his family roots in Poland. And he came across this photograph of his grandfather playing in this mandolin orchestra in the town of Ger around the 20s or 30s. And for some reason, this really inspired and gripped him, and he set out on this quest to revive the Ger Mandolin Orchestra as a tribute to his ancestors, as well as a broader tribute to Jewish-Polish life. So that's where the whole project started, and Avner is a really extraordinary man. Who was just sort of relentless in his quest to put this thing together. So he started by enlisting Mike Marshall, who's one of the world's greatest mandolin players, also lives in the Bay Area. He enlisted Mike as the musical director, and then Mike set about putting the orchestra together, and Mike sought out musicians, great mandolin players. He wasn't really thinking necessarily about if they're Jewish, if they know Jewish music, et cetera, et cetera. There were a couple people like myself that were brought into the orchestra that are specifically coming from a musical background with some expertise in playing Jewish music. So it actually gave me the opportunity to bring in a bunch of music that we performed with the group. Because
So who called you?
I was called by Mike, which was amazing to get a call from him, because he's been a very influential mandolin player in my musical development. He's been playing for 30 years plus. And really a significant figure in the contemporary modern mandolin world. So getting a call from him was pretty exciting.
A compliment.
It was exciting. It was really exciting, and then to actually get together in a room with him and the other people that he put together, and he put together a stellar group of players from a lot of different musical backgrounds. The stylistic backgrounds of the musicians range from folk and ethnic world music and Jewish music to jazz and bluegrass and Brazilian music, all sorts of different things. So when we got together, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to contribute a bunch of arrangements that I've written over the years for mandolin orchestra. This is something Jewish mandolin music has fascinated me for years, and it's been something I've pursued in different ways musically. And I had written all these arrangements, and now I finally had an opportunity to play them with a group of top-notch professionals.
How did that work with Poland and the musicians there? And where did you play? Did you actually go to Ger, to the town of Ger?
We did. So the project first started in March. We gave our first performance in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, in March. Shortly after which, Avner got a letter from the mayor of the current town of Góra Kalvária, congratulating him on this accomplishment and inviting the orchestra to perform in the town. And Avner had the chutzpah to actually say, yeah, okay, we'll take you up on that. And he set about, he actually got in touch with a festival in Warsaw, the Singer Festival, which is a big festival of Jewish music and culture in Warsaw. So they were deeply involved with bringing us there. And we ended up performing at the festival in Warsaw, as well as in the town of Ger in the original synagogue.
So you got a good taste or look at Jewish life. And you've been there before, but Let's continue after the break. We'll be right back. I'm talking with Eric Stein, director of Ashkenaz, the largest music festival in North America, and his experiences in Poland. You performed in Ger, you performed in Warsaw. What did you see of Jewish life in Poland? They say there's a resurgence.
You know, I'm not sure that the resurgence is more about a kind of cultural renaissance. There's a lot of festivals that have sprouted up in Poland that celebrate Jewish life one way or another.
The Warsaw Yiddish Festival?
Well, you know, a lot of them are run by Polish people and done, in many cases, done very respectfully and with a great deal of depth and intelligence.
But run by Polish people?
For the most part, yeah. There are Jews involved, but, you know, there's very little Jewish population left in Poland. So, you know, this was my 4th time in Poland, so it wasn't a new experience for me. It was a little bit different than some of my previous experiences. I'd played at the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow previously, which was a different feeling. The feeling at that festival was different than the feeling at the Singer Festival in Warsaw. In Warsaw, the feeling was a little bit more superficial than what I had felt when I was in Krakow. There was a feeling of it being sort of like a play that was being put on for the public to show what Jewish life was like. But, you know, there was also a lot of great performances, and either way it does bring back a presence of Jewish history and culture in that part of the world, which is important, and that's the beginning of healing and understanding, and I think there are a lot of younger Polish people that sincerely regrets that they've been deprived of the genius and brilliance of Jewish people being part of their nation.
And they're curious?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
So who came to the performances? Who was your audience?
In Ger, we were playing mostly for the current population there. There were some
and they
people,
came out to hear?
Yeah, and it was, I mean, it was incredible. It was really a very warm environment. We played in the old synagogue there. I don't think that synagogue had that many people in it for 70 years. It's a decrepit old building that's, you know, broken down and not really taken well care of. And it was such a warm, electric kind of energy in the room when we performed. And the audience was so appreciative, and they were, I think, curious and interested and entertained by the music we performed. And we also perform a fairly eclectic repertoire. So we play, as much as we play Jewish music, we play some Polish music, which they, you know, they ate it up. I mean, it was unbelievable, the response to that. They were really sort of, I think, taken aback and shocked by us playing Polish music, and felt that it was a nod of respect on our part in a way, and also a nod of towards what we think is historically accurate, that this group in its original context would have performed Polish music. That was its context. We also performed some Italian music. So it was, a real mix of repertoire, not just Jewish. There's sort of a cosmopolitan feeling about the orchestra and about the context that we think it previously functioned within.
You're known as a klezmer musician. You have this amazing group, Beyond the Pale. You play all over the world. What drew you, an English-speaking, Canadian-born person, Polish grandparents, okay, Polish grandparents, but you didn't grow up with Yiddish. What drew you to this?
I think on a really basic level, the music itself is really amazing music, and when I kind of discovered it for myself in my mid-20s, it really kind of opened my ears and my eyes up to something that I really wanted to delve into and pursue my own musical self-expression within. On a deeper level, I think that there's a sense of, by interacting with this music and the art and culture around it, it brings me closer to my own history and to my grandparents and a sense of my own lineage. I've always felt more connected to my Eastern European roots than to Israel, for example. Israel is something that I've had to sort of come to later in life in a way and make it part of my Jewish identity, whereas with that Eastern European aspect...
Closer to you.
Yeah, the Eastern European thing was really close, mostly because my grandparents, my bubby was so close to me in terms of her being a representative of Yiddishkeit and something that I really connected to on a personal level. So getting involved with this music, as I did, was a way of delving into that connection.
You're going in... Lately, you've gone in another direction, quite new, Brazilian music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and in a way it kind of ties into my Jewish music interest.
Brazilian with klezmer?
Well, not klezmer, definitely not. But basically it ties in with my being a mandolin player. I love all kinds of great mandolin music, and I got exposed to the recordings of a great mandolin player whose name was Jaco do Bandolim. He was from Brazil. He happened to be Jewish. And he was a giant, an amazing, a real towering figure and an innovator within a style of music called choro music, which is an older, some people refer to it as the sort of ragtime music of Brazil, or like the New Orleans jazz of Brazil. It's kind of an earlier form of Brazilian urban folk music that eventually spawned bossa nova and samba and all the sort of modern styles of Brazilian music. And so his recordings, which were made mostly in the 50s and 60s, really just grabbed me, and I wanted to start to learn to play that music, and I delved into it and found that a lot of the stylistic nuance within that music, a lot of things that I employ in playing Jewish music, I could bring into that music in terms of the expressivity and just the sort of lyrical, emotional content of the music. They're completely different styles of music. There's no specific relationship between choro music and klezmer or anything like that. The fact that Jaco do Bandolim was Jewish makes me think, well, maybe there's some sort of very, very subtle connection. But mostly it's just really interesting music and really amazing mandolin music that has inspired me greatly. And so over the last couple of years, I've started a group here in Toronto called Trio Chorinho. And I had a chance to go to Brazil about a month and a half ago and study with some great musicians and just soak it all in. And so it's one of the really, really inspiring things that I'm involved with at the moment musically.
And are you going to be performing in Toronto or
with
elsewhere
that group?
with this group?
Yeah, actually, we're performing this coming Sunday at Lula Lounge. So, but I mean, we've been doing festivals and things like that, and so I think that we'll eventually make a CD recording and probably get out and try to do a little more touring.
Well, you'll have to come back.
Sure.
With this music, because sure. I can't imagine, I associate you with not just klezmer, but your group does fusion, has many, many influences, Eastern European, Arabic, Middle East.
More like Balkan, Romanian,
Balkan,
that
Romanian,
kind of stuff, yeah.
Eastern European, and yet this is a huge departure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. To me, it doesn't feel like a huge departure because I think the consistent aspect of the different musical projects that I'm involved with is just a certain level of excellence within the music
But still, your
itself.
forte is Yiddish and Yiddish music. And people say it's a dying language. What do you say?
Well, tell that to people who speak Yiddish. Tell that to the thousands of people that come to our festival and go
And
to
young people.
concerts and workshops and lectures and discussions and films and all sorts of things that involve the Yiddish language. I think the language doesn't function the same way it did in the past as a vernacular everyday language, but the culture that is happening around Yiddish today is really vibrant, and it means that Yiddish isn't going anywhere.
All right, and this year, another Ashkenaz.
Yeah.
Come back and tell us about it, and a sample of your Brazilian music.
Sounds good.
Deal?
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
The occupation. Is there a Jewish role in this? There's certainly Jewish people. And what is it really about? Where is it going? I have with me Mika Gang, who's a member of Hashomer HaSayir, a Zionist Youth movement, a socialist Zionist Youth movement, and you were there from the beginning, Mika. So I want to read you this quote from Richard Gwynn, who's a columnist for The Star. He says, "As a protest movement, it's probably past its peak. It has no specific ideas of how to close the gap between the 1% of the hyper-wealthy and the other 99%. Yet, the core issue raised by the Occupy movement of a deeply rooted unfairness in the existing system, the evidence keeps accumulating that it's onto something, the occupation is onto something fundamental, and in a short time, a few months, it's won the support of 58% of Canadians and about 1/3 of Americans." First of all, has it reached its peak?
I would say it hasn't. I would say definitely that analysis comes from the opinion that a lot of the evictions have happened around North America in different cities and in Toronto as well by Mayor Ford. And I think what that does is it really challenges a movement inherently to a place where we have to adapt. And that's what's going to happen to any movement at any point in time.
But is it adapting?
Yes, it is definitely
How is
adapting.
it keeping alive? It's gone from St. James
So,
Place, the park.
There's a lot going on, and it's very exciting
What's
right now.
going on?
So, for example, we still have our general assemblies every evening at 6 p.m. at City Hall. There's still a group of up to 60 people coming. There's still proposals being set forward, and there's still notions of how we want to kind of solve these gaps that we're criticizing in society. And what's evolved from that is a number of committees, and a number of committees have taken actions and campaigns according to what's relevant at the time of year. For example, there's an Occupy the Holidays campaign, there's Occupy
What does
TTC.
that mean, Occupy the Holidays?
Occupy Holidays is spreading awareness about consumerism, particularly now it's really important with crazy Christmas and Hanukkah and holiday shopping. Just to take a moment to think, to be critical consumers, and to think, is this all we have to vote with? You know, is this our agency, our wallet? Is that what we've got? I think there's a lot of really moving questions within that. Occupy TTC right now, the Toronto Public Transportation System is going through today an important vote, which is if they're going to accept the city's budget proposed for 2012, which means a 10% reduction in funding to the public transportation system. Basically, it's part of a larger pattern which really targets the lower class.
Because of the raise in transport?
Well, what it's going to mean is a raise in fees and poorer service. Whenever public services are taken away from the public and businesses are privatized, it means that whoever is going to be receiving these services, you know, by private corporations are people who can afford it. And I think it really challenges the base of what's a human right, you know? Is healthcare a human right, or is it just according to your wallet size?
What's the answer?
Yes. I mean, I think yes. I think the Occupy
What
movement
else is
says
our
yes.
right? What are we entitled to?
I think we're entitled to mobility and, you know, an ability to thrive and succeed in society. And I think that brings into a lot of questions, you know, in terms of what we should have access to. For example, health care. For example, child care. You know, just to comment on another part of the quote, which is it past its peak? And I don't know if you're familiar with Judy Rebick, sorry. But she's very prominent in second wave feminist movements and very active in Oise right now. And basically, she came to the Occupy movement a day before the eviction, and she said, I just want to remind everyone, it took the women's liberation movement 20 years. So I think there's been an anti-globalization, anti-capitalist movement ongoing for a long time. I think it hasn't reached its peak. A very exciting success in the Occupy movement is about 2 weeks ago, there was a very big conference of over 100 people, people who are homeless, youth, disabled, you know, upper middle class, single parents, elderly. And this conference was in the old stock exchange, which is the Design Exchange now. And essentially it was, where is the Occupy movement going? What is our next step? And
when was this?
This was 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It was incredible. It was insightful, and there was a lot of overlap. And I think the overlap shows some very specific interests in the movement. For example, some of the central points were, you know, maybe Occupy's priority, one of the priorities should be bringing back Transit City, you know. And another one is corporations should not be considered persons under the law. And these are two very specific points that received resounding support in the room of this like very diverse, very empowered group of people.
Okay, they have support. 58% of Canadians agree with you. A third of Americans agree with you. How is it going to happen with no leadership, no apparent leadership? How do decisions get made when part of the philosophy is that there is no hierarchy?
I think a very exciting shift in the movement, and I think this has come from a process of collective learning and challenging, is that it's not a leaderless movement. It's a leaderful movement. And what that means is everyone is empowered, and we're taking back democracy and what it means.
It's grand. It's beautiful. It's noble.
Yeah.
But how does it? But does it work?
So, I mean, the base is consensus building, and there's no question that democracy's biggest flaw is its efficiency. You know, it takes longer, but maybe that's a value that's really important. And basically, what it's meant is that everyone has kind of begin taking upon themselves the next
responsibility.
Steps. Responsibility.
Everybody's responsible. Everybody's a leader.
Yeah.
We'll find out more about does this really work, and where is this going? Back in a minute. Mika, you wrote, we must strive to make decisions as a movement by consensus building. Through conversation and debate, we will determine what the right steps are. This is a model, it looks ideal, it sounds beautiful, that should be expanded beyond the park. So, everybody is heard, everybody's responsible, and everybody's a leader. How does this really work in real life?
Well, I can give you some hard examples of how it's worked and how it's really furthered the movement.
And is this the ideal, is this the template for Occupy around the world?
Yes. I mean, I think there's a lot of places where it started. I think the Arab Spring, you know, was a very exciting moment where finally we really gathered a lot of inspiration from the Eastern world. And it was kind of this like reverse colonial powered hierarchy.
You said it started in Israel.
Well, there's the Arab Spring, and then there was this resounding social movement, and the model of the Israeli social movement, or the 10 protests, or 10 cities that sprang up during the summer that were protesting high housing costs and high living costs generally, really served as inspiration. and as a blueprint. And I think what we've learned, and definitely I've seen this in Occupy Toronto, is our structure is based on inspiration from the different movements. So we have a way to communicate, we have terminology, and we have a forum. And
do you have leaders?
Well, it's we are all leaders.
Theoretically, but actually.
Well,
somebody takes the initiative. Somebody stands up there.
Well, what's been acknowledged is a structure that we need, and a structure that means we need to have this conversation. It needs to be facilitated. We need to have a minute taker. We need to cover these issues, and we need to leave this space for breakout groups or proposals to be suggested, and we rotate roles. So what that means is everyone is a leader. Everyone leads a forum at a different moment. And I think this comes from a space that we acknowledge that a lot of our spaces for democracy and dialogue really don't encourage equal participation and equal representation of different minorities.
This is really the philosophy of Hashemers are here.
Tell me about it. It really is. I really identify with it. I grew up in Ashkenaz, and I really feel like this is what I've been studying and the values that I go by. And it's very exciting.
There have been a lot of anti-Israel sentiments, propaganda, bashing in Wall Street. Has this happened in Toronto?
I've been around. I was there for the first march. I've been there, as often as I can, being a student and a worker, which the majority of the protesters are, despite what the media said.
What does the media say?
The media, I think it's been construed as a movement of...
Rich kids?
No. Rich kids in Wall Street is what the media has been saying, and the media has been saying in Toronto, bums. People will walk past the park and say, get a job, and I would love to tell you what I do for a living. I'd love to do that. And basically, I've seen no anti-Israel sentiment in Toronto. I know that it definitely has reared its head in Wall Street, and I know there's a lot of Jewish leadership in Wall Street as well. And I have to say that when...
In fact, there are two Israelis that I've heard about that have taken leadership in Wall Street.
And there's a large number of alumni from Hashomer Tzir as well, kind of ranging from the age of 22 to 28 that are also very active in the movement.
Are they, as well as the Occupy philosophy, are they dealing with the anti-Israel issues?
I think inherently it is dealt with in a big way because it goes against a stance of occupation, of this Occupy movement, which is equal space for everyone. So if there's an anti-Israel sentiment that's construed as anti-Semitism or kind of like this post-Zionist movement that Israel shouldn't exist, it's dealt with in a way that Israelis are another group of people that deserve to be represented. I think the pattern that when there's a high prevalence of identifying leftist political groups together, I think there tends to be a lot of anti-Israel sentiments. So I'm not surprised that that's kind of been the occurrence, but I do believe it's being dealt with as any other, racism is being dealt with.
But this didn't really happen in a significant way in Toronto.
No, it didn't. And, I have to say that part of our forum and the structure that we've really evolved as a movement is when we open our forum, we say, I'd like to acknowledge we're on already occupied land. And, when we were in the park, we would say we are on already occupied land.
What does that mean, we're on occupied land?
It means this land has been occupied through colonial rule.
Oh, you mean the first people?
Yeah,
the
the First Nations.
People.
So we would say, when we were in St. James Park, we would say, first, we would like to acknowledge we are on already occupied land, which is owned by the Mississauga New Credit. And then we would say, I want to remind you to incorporate each other's ideas into your own, to step up. If your voice is not being heard, step back. If your voice is being heard and you're overshadowing others, and that we shouldn't see any racist, ableist, ageist, homophobic, transphobic language. And that's really, been the underlying thing, is that we have a lot of learned oppressions, and this is a forum where we're trying to move past it and be a model for society.
And you say it's working.
I say there's something beautiful being created. I say there's a lot more work to be done. We are not in our peak, which means we are getting there, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
Have people faded away? About how many people? When I went down to the occupation, it looked very full at the time. That whole site was occupied.
Right.
But now that they've been kicked out of the park,
Now that
have people dropped away?
I would say, and this is, a general tragedy in society, the people who have dropped away are the people who, in losing the park, also lost their shelter and food, because there's not enough funding in Toronto for shelters.
You mean there were a lot of people, homeless people?
Who received social services like they hadn't before in the park, because that's what we provided. Everyone provided it together. Everyone took turns working the food tent, working the medical tent, the media tents, and they kind of received this community that hadn't been accessible to them previously. And those are the people who now, without, it's kind of a luxury to worry about these issues and have time and space, and dry clothes on your back to discuss it. So when you don't have those necessities, it's hard not to fall off the edges.
We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. More about the occupation and about how Zionist youth movements have changed over the years. You came as a member of a Jewish Zionist youth organization, not just a Jewish organization, and other Jewish people came and brought Jewish customs, values. What did they do? How did you bring Judaism to the occupation?
Right. Well, I think the Occupy values need to be sort of applied to the different realms of our lives, and Judaism is a perfect example, and I think it is very in line with Jewish ideology, the entire
But you
Occupy
actually
movement.
made a sukkah there.
So I went with some friends, we built a sukkah. It was a beautiful process. It was on the second day of the Occupy movement. We were all at the park, and it was a group of 10 to 15 of us, including a Palestinian friend that we met along the way and was interested in the process. And basically, it was at the time of year that Sukkot is celebrated, which is a beautiful holiday. And we had a woman studying to be a rabbi kind of start off the conversation by describing the holiday to us. And we, spoke a bit about it. And then we spoke of building a sukkah. And we
You actually did it.
And we built a sukkah. And we thought it was very relevant. And just because the idea is you're supposed to live in your sukkah how you would in the homeland. So it's like this very idealistic and humbling experience. And while we built it, what was very beautiful is people who had no idea about the holiday and the relevance of the structure would come and learn about it and help us build. And when the wind blew it down, a bunch of people who heard it was a sukkah came and rebuilt it and tied pieces of corn to it. And it was just like this very beautiful atmosphere. But essentially, I really feel that there's a strong role for Judaism to take within the Occupy movement.
In what way?
I think, at our core, we believe in tikkun adam, tikkun olam. And I think these are the values of the Occupy movement. I think we're reflecting on our lives and our societies and ourselves. We want to change from the inside, and we want to change the external society, and it's an inherent taking responsibility for the structures we're living within and the institutions that influence us. There's also, a rabbi from a downtown Jewish organization who came, and there was a big congregation. And one of the Shabbat evenings it was Yom Shishi, but, in preparation for the Shabbat, there's a large congregation, including a lot of young children because there was a lot of young parents there. And we had a really long, beautiful Havdalah, and the General Assembly that was scheduled to happen at 7 that day had to be pushed an hour so we could finish.
And they did.
They did. Oh, yeah. They said, well, if you're, celebrating your Judaism, we want to support you. We want to support diversity.
Did this happen in Wall Street in New York? To your knowledge?
There's a yes, in a big way, in a huge way. There's a very inspiring Occupy Judaism movement, which is kind of, we're taking back the values of Judaism. We're reinventing our structures, making sure they're relevant to us. And in that way, there's been like a large cry out for an alternative celebration of the different holidays. expanding inclusivity, making sure that the Jewish community isn't excluding same-sex families or mixed marriages, and that we're really creating an open space for our Judaism.
What you said earlier about tikkun olam and Jewish concept of righteousness and justice is fundamental to the occupation. That's what you're really telling us.
Mm-hmm. Social justice.
So it's not a far out movement, actually.
No, and I have to say that I know it's been really construed as something radical, and I'm surprised that it hasn't entered the mainstream more, because, it's a criticism, especially for young academics. If you go to university and you study history or any third world politics, or, you're going to come across these criticisms of society. I've been hearing it over and over for the 5 years I've been doing my undergrad. And so I'm surprised. I'm surprised people are scared, to identify with it.
I wanted to switch in a few remaining minutes to your youth organization. The emphasis, when I was a kid, was that at 18 you immigrate to Israel, you make aliyah, you enter kibbutz, and that's it. But you're older than that. You're 23?
I'm 23.
And you still wear the chutzah, the shirt of the youth movement. How has this changed over the years?
In a big way. I think we've realized that the goal of Aliyah was not necessarily relevant to us, and you might call it a little Bundist of us, but we really wanted to be connected to our localities. And we wanted to be taking responsibility for our localities and changing them, in a very occupy our localities way. And so what that kind of has turned into is we still endorse Aliyah because we inherently, as socialist Zionists...
But it's not axiomatic that you make Aliyah.
Well, we have a few who have made Aliyah recently, and it's very exciting, and they're there to be activists within the state of Israel, and,
Not to go to kibbutz? Is that not the aim anymore?
Well, okay, so if I talk a bit about what our Hagshama is today, I think you'll understand our take on the kibbutz movement. I think our analysis of the kibbutz movement is that for some reason it has failed. And it was beautiful, and it was strong and empowering, but it's failed. And a big criticism that we have on it is that it didn't allow for reinventing of the structure, which meant that once the youth grew up within the kibbutz, they said, well, it's great that my parents fought for this and built this, and it's beautiful, but I didn't. This represents something a little more archaic. And so what we think is that it needs to be a structure that is constantly adapting. And so our current modern rendition of the kibbutz movement is focusing on applying communalism to urban life. And what that means is, in Toronto, I'm an example of one of the groups. We've started creating urban communes.
And you call it in Hebrew, but you call it something in
Komuna.
Hebrew. Komuna.
Komuna. We all have different titles. Ours is Giva, which means hilltop. They're all in Hebrew. And we live communal lives, financially communal, educationally communal, socially communal. And it's very, very liberating, very exciting. And the long-term vision is an urban kibbutz, and how to tie that into different agricultural innovations within
Living in the city? A kibbutz in the city?
A kibbutz in the city.
But the agriculture cannot be.
Well, I think land is very expensive within the cities, and that's our biggest challenge. And so different suggestions that have been brought up is maybe to have a rural hub and an urban hub. Something that connects the two.
But still the idea of kibbutz, but it's transplanted from Israel to here.
Yeah.
The idea of collective living, of everyone for everyone.
We want to bring the values everywhere. We think it doesn't belong in one place, but it belongs everywhere, and it's our responsibility to, heal the system.
Mika Gang, I thank you very, very much. It's very illuminating. There's been a dramatic, drastic change, and I think we should explore this further, and we will.
I'm happy to.
Thank you, Mika.
Thank you.